So are we living in the end times? People have been saying that for 2,000 years, wondering if we're in the end times. Every generation probably has thought in one way or another that they were in the end times. I'm certain that those who lived in the year 536 thought that they were in the end times when they had volcanic ash that went pretty much all around the world and covered up and ruined the farm crops in a lot of the Western societies in Europe, especially. And so they probably thought they were in the end times. So we have that going on. And people are wondering today, are we in the end times? Well, here's what the Bible says, that the gospel would be preached to the whole world. Matthew 25 says that. Now, has it been preached to the whole world? Well, it's certainly been preached to quite a bit, but you could probably find some pockets in Africa and maybe India, maybe China, and certainly the Sentinel Islands just outside of, where is that? I think that's outside of India. You could certainly find some places where the gospel has not been preached, but many people have been impacted. And so it has been preached all over the world, in many places of the world. Thessalonians 2, 1-12 says a great apostasy of people turning away from the faith would occur. Now, have we seen that? Yes. That's really recent, this whole idea of the rise of atheists and agnostics, especially in places that have been predominantly Christian. So many European societies, especially Canada and the United Kingdom and Northern Europe and New Zealand and Australia, there's certainly been a turning away of the faith. The United States is somewhat of an outlier in that, as many people in the United States have retained our Christian faith. Thank God. God bless the USA. We also believe from Matthew 24, 6-13, that many tribulations, natural and man-made, and wars and rumors of wars will occur. And of course, that's been going on since Jesus' time. And even prior to that, we've got much evidence through the Bible of wars and rumors of wars. So that's something that has been ongoing. But is it getting worse? Some are saying that the weather's getting worse. And if you're one of those people who believes that it's man-made climate change is a big factor and how we've gone from 1 billion people walking around the planet in 1800 to over 7 billion walking around today, that certainly have an impact on our air, the air that we breathe. And so they have attributed it to that, but others might say, well, perhaps some of the climate issues that we're seeing, like the hurricanes and the floods and all of those kind of things, the tornadoes, the earthquakes. What's interesting is Florida, where I live, is the capital of lightning strikes in the world. And almost all tornadoes happen to hit in places like Kansas. So lots and lots of tornadoes in places like that. So yeah, we certainly are seeing some climate issues, and people who are saying that we've got issues with global and climate crisis might look to God as a source of some of that. Now, another thing is the red heifers or cows. In the Bible, if we're going to build a third temple, one of the things that you need is a red heifer. So the red heifer was recently born in Israel, and you can go back to Numbers 19 to see that. That's part of the process of taking the ashes of the red heifer and blessing the temple. So we do need a temple. That's mentioned in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, and also in the book of Daniel, where the abomination of desolation appears in the temple. So there needs to be a third temple, I believe. Now, some have countered that, said there doesn't need to be a third temple, but I believe there does. And that poses a bit of a problem. I'm noticing I have wrong numbering here, so ignore that right there. But that poses a bit of a problem, this third temple, because the Temple Mount is currently occupied by a very sacred site that Muslims have. So the Muslims conveniently located one of their most important mosques on the Temple Mount, where the Second Temple had been destroyed in the year 70, as you recalled. Many Jewish people scattered all throughout the world at that point. Romans 11:25-26 says there's going to be a universal conversion of the Jews to Jesus. Now, obviously, we haven't seen that. If we go to Israel, we're going to see that many of the people of Israel don't even believe in Judaism. Many of the people are atheists over there. And so something big is going to happen. And Israel, of course, is always at the heart of things. And just the birth of Israel in 1948 is certainly a significant event. 1,878 years after Israel was pretty much knocked off the map by Romans, 1,878 years, in 1948, Israel was born. And ever since that, even the day after they formed, there was a war declared on Israel. So constantly has been battling with wars, and they have their neighbors all around them. Now, of course, that also was predicted in the Bible, that the neighbors all around Israel would be waging battles against them. And then, of course, there's the revelation of the Antichrist and the abomination of desolation. That's in Daniel 9:27. Mark 13:14. He's going to try to set times and change laws, as mentioned in Daniel 7. The Antichrist is going to deny that Jesus came in the flesh in 2 John 1:7, and deny the Father and the Son, 1 John 2:22. So we've got a lot of stuff. So what I'm going to do, I want to focus on the changes that have occurred in the world since Pope Leo, I'm just going to mention that, Pope Leo the 13th. He had an encounter with Jesus and Satan. He was in church, he was up by an altar, and he went into a trance while he was in this church. He heard a conversation between Jesus and Satan. This is on October 13th, 1884. He said, I need greater power over those who will give themselves over to my service. So what's the evidence that Satan has been sort of raging a battle? Maybe he's getting to be desperate because he's noticing that he has little time left, but he said he needed to have a battle. And it was going to be over his service. So, or he needed people over his service. So now, how would we find evidence of this? Well, let's take a look at our culture and the cultural changes since this occurred over the past 140 years or so. So, of course, we know Israel formed. There's the red heifer. There's the evidence of this red heifer being born in Israel. So there are people who are really going for a third temple. They want to see the third temple be put up. And then we ask, what has Mother Mary said about the end times? So you probably recall that Mother Mary appeared to the children of Fatima, and she told them that they needed to consecrate to her Immaculate Heart. She said Russia needed to consecrate to her Immaculate Heart, and she really pointed a lot of attention to Russia. So let's go back and look at Russia after where Russia really comes into this. So, of course, you probably know that Karl Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto around 1848. So the Communist Manifesto was used by many of the leaders of Russia, the communists in Russia, and that was something that came about especially hard in 1917. So first, Russia entered World War I in 1914 and sustained about 1.8 million military deaths and 1.5 million civilian deaths under the leadership of Tsar Nicholas II. The food system collapsed and people began to riot. In March 1917, Nicholas stepped down. In the following October revolution, the Bolsheviks imprisoned the Tsar and his family. They eventually slaughtered them in really gruesome ways on July 17th, 1918. Mary started to appear to the children at Fatima on May 13th, 1917. She appeared to thousands of people. The O Século Portuguese newspaper reported about 70,000 people witnessed this, and they were of all walks and stripes. And that was on October 13th, 1917. Now, on May 13th, 1917, an assassin tried to kill Bishop Eugenio Pacelli in Munich, but his bullet was thwarted when it bounced off the crucifix he was wearing around his neck. In 1917, here's what Mary told the children, that if the Pope properly consecrated Russia to her Immaculate Heart, Russia would be converted to Jesus. Here's a quote from her. God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. If what I say to you is done, many souls will be saved and there will be peace. The war is going to end. If people do not cease offending God, a worse one will break out during the pontificate of Pius the 11th. Now, when she said this, there was no Pius the 11th. Pius the 11th came into office after this. She said, when you see a night illuminated by an unknown light, know that this is the great sign given you by God that he is about to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the church and of the Holy Father. To prevent this, I shall come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, she will spread her airs throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she will be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. Now let's note something. That light that was going to illuminate the sky, that came just prior to World War II in 1937. It was reported in newspapers all around Europe and all around the United States. People witnessed it all around. in these different places, this really crazy light. And it was a sign that World War II was to come. And of course, that was when, around the same time, just after that, we have Adolf Hitler marching into Austria and the whole start of World War II. So the popes finally get around to doing the consecration. Here's where they started doing it, but they didn't do it properly until 1984. So first we have is October 31st, 1942. Now this is, of course, after 1917, way after it. Pope Pius XII consecrated the whole of humanity to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, but he didn't mention the name Russia. Big mistake, Pope. On July 7th, 1952, he consecrated, quote, the people of Russia to her Immaculate Heart. Pope Paul VI consecrated humanity on November 21st, 1964. After an attempted murder on Pope John Paul II, he asked for the papers from Fatima. He wanted to speak to Sister Lucia to ask her about this. Someone had attempted to kill him on May 13th, 1981, which is the anniversary of Mary's first appearance to the children at Fatima. So he consecrated the whole human race in 1981. But then on the Feast of the Annunciation on March 25th, 1984, he properly consecrated Russia after consulting with Sister Lucia to ensure its validity. He did it right. Communism fell in Russia in 1991, and Russia and Ukraine experienced a short period of peace. Okay, Clinton brokered much of that. In fact, we told Ukraine if they gave up their nuclear weapons that we would always protect them. That's part of the reason, I think, why we're still involved in Ukraine. And I think we should be. I think a humanitarian decision is to get involved in Ukraine, even though I'm seeing some crazy stuff go on, which I'm about to mention in just a second. So Russia invaded Ukraine again in 2014 and annexed Crimea. Russia then declared war on Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, which is why Pope Francis consecrated Russia to Mary's Immaculate Heart on March 25th, 2022. But sadly, when you're doing things like that and you have witches operating all throughout Ukraine and Russia, in fact, Zelensky hired a witch named Marina Abramovic, while the Great Witches of Russia Association has been conjuring up rituals to bring Putin power. To counter the latter, Ukrainian witches have also been conjuring spells against Russia. We have had a rise in witchcraft and the occult over the past 150 years. We're definitely seeing more activity with that. I just listened to this former witch on Michael Knowles' channel, which was really good. So here's what Sister Lucia said. She said Satan's final war on humanity would be his war on the family. So the war on the family, that's our big thing coming up here next. So would this be considered further revelation from God when you have time to answer? Yeah, so a lot of this is the church approved. Fatima is a church approved apparition. So that has been approved. And to approve stuff, they want to see miracles associated with it. And when she appeared in October 13th to all of those people, many people were cured of some pretty serious illnesses, blindness, and even paralysis. So he said Satan's final war is going to be the war on the family. So wedding feast, think about how the Bible opens. So the Bible opens with Adam and Eve and God uniting them in marriage and calls them to bring forth children. In Genesis 1:27, it says, we are made in God's image. Man and women are made in the image of God. So Jesus' first miracle occurs at the wedding at Cana. Wedding feasts are a sign of our relationship to Jesus as a covenant between two of unity and love, where two people become one flesh and bring forth children. So that is very important to note. Now here's what it looked like going back to say when Satan and Jesus, when the Pope overheard a conversation between Satan and Jesus, and Satan said he needs about 100 years. Well, here's how people were dressing. Look how nice people dressed in the 1880s. If you ever look at old formal pictures of New York City and other places around the world, you're going to see that people were dressing a lot nicer than they dress today and much more modestly. The stuff people are wearing these days is pretty sad. So here's what the Bible says about purity and modesty and how important that is. 1 Timothy 2:9 says, I also want women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes. Deuteronomy 22:5 says, a woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear women's clothing, for the Lord your God detests anyone who does this. 1 Corinthians 6:18 says, flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. And then 1 Timothy 4:12, Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Very important to remain pure. Now, look what has happened. Look at our swimsuits. I'm sure you guys probably now the 1980s, that bikini right there actually looks much more tame than the types of things, the thongs that I've been seeing on my college campus. And when you go to the beach, you definitely see a lot of that kind of stuff. And so he's definitely, Satan is winning on this one. Okay. He's winning with the sexuality thing. And you can see, like, even going back to the 60s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, free love, all that kind of stuff. Love the one you're with, all that stuff. Satan has been wreaking havoc on our planet. And he wanted time to do this. And unfortunately, also in the 60s, of course, we had the spread of communism, but also a lot of communists were plotting in the 60s about how they were going to invade parts of society through the newspapers, the media, and our schools. And of course, we've seen their success stories lately in the indoctrination that they've done to our kids. Some of the kids who are now engaging in all kinds of terrible practices, a lot of that stems from communism, sadly, really sadly. They've also unfortunately invaded our universities, say for the business schools. So if you're thinking of sending your kids to the universities, you might want to think twice before sending them places like Harvard or UPenn or places where we've had these crazy people. Tulane right now is experiencing, unfortunately, some havoc. You also have havoc being wreaked over in Stanford. And so you might want to think twice. Also, you might want to be really selective on the type of major the students go into. I think business majors are wonderful. There's a great use of your skills once you graduate. Also, I would really talk about other majors like engineering, medical fields, pharmaceuticals, nursing. All of those are really good fields because you definitely will get jobs. You've got good jobs tied into that. But some of the other things like gender studies and that kind of stuff, what a waste of time. I'm sorry. It's not a good use of your time because what are you going to do when you graduate? So that's that. That's what I think. And I will stand up to that. Here is this rotten group of people who somehow were given some sort of approval by the LA Dodgers, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Now, these are men who are dressed up as nuns and are basically playing on the Catholic faith. It's really awful because it's really what do you call it? It's just being kind of sinful towards the Catholic faith and trying to represent nuns in such a terrible way. And so shame on them. But also shame on this kind of stuff. You see it in our culture a lot of times at these pride marches. And of course, they call it pride when you're going in opposition to what God wants with humility. They've also hijacked the rainbow from God. The rainbow is for us. The rainbow is given us as a sign of peace and love from God and a covenant between us and God. And so they've taken the rainbow flag to mean something very different from God's intentions in the Bible. And these kind of marches, a lot of times people are running around in the nude at these things. And so that's what's pretty gross. I mean, again, we're told to be modest and humble, not nude running around and flapping our parts to little kids, which is what we're seeing. So yeah, big problem. And then we also have marriage. So there's an attack on marriage. So marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed should be kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. That's Hebrews 13:4. Genesis 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And then Matthew 19:4-6, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. Pretty important stuff. So what have we seen on the stats on marriage? Well, divorce rates. So in the 1880s, 0.3 divorces for every 1,000 persons, 1939's 1.9, 1950s 2.5, 99, 4.1. That was the peak. And it came down a little bit, 2.9 divorces for every 1,000 persons. Then, of course, we also have women voluntarily sacrificing their unborn children to the gods of abundance. This is exactly what people did in the ancient Canaanite tribes. The Philistines also did this kind of stuff. They did it, though, outwardly with the actual sacrifice of born children. This is the sacrifice of the unborn children. And this was a lot of this interesting thing is right after Mary said that Russia will spread its heirs. On November 18th, 1920, Russia, as the USSR, legalized abortion. Today, around 136 countries have legalized it, which has led to the legal genocides of over 1 billion innocent human beings. In ancient times, people often did the same thing after they were born. Now they do it before. The optics don't look so good if you wait till after the child is born. But if women paid attention to their ultrasounds, they probably would never do this in the first place. So, yeah, that's the thing. Susan's totally right. Says, the family and the church are in the crosshairs of the Antichrist. Yeah, he is waging an attack. He's waging an attack on our children, and he's waging an attack on our people, our families. And you can see some other things going on. And this all goes back to Genesis 3:15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So a lot of this goes back to then when we see this war, this constant battle. It also goes to Revelation 11:19. This is the final passage in Revelation 11, and then we'll get to the very next passage in Revelation 12. What is this Ark of the Covenant? Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and the Ark of his covenant was seen within his temple. There were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunders, an earthquake, and heavy hail. So then what happens? Well, then we see right after that, there appeared a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. Just quick segue, remember King Herod trying to kill off all the children who were born within a 2-year period because he did not want competition in his kingdom. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Of course, that's Jesus. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled to the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God. Okay, so we have that. And that also refers to, of course, Mother Mary, the one who gave birth to the ruler of the world. Revelation 12:12. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. Now, of course, the Apostle John wrote this. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to a place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. The serpent poured out water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. So what's really interesting, but the earth came, let me just read this last part and then I'll tell you the interesting thing. Whoops, let me go back. Sorry. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring and those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. So one of the things that a lot of exorcists has pointed out that they've said is that the devil absolutely hates Mother Mary, can't stand her because she was so humble and so pure. And when she appears now, when you find her at places like XIII, all you see is magnificent light emanating from her, illuminating the whole sky. She's magnificently light. When you die, you're going to go to one of 3 places. Few get to the narrow path and go right to heaven. Many go to purgatory and are purged of their sins. So the saints go right to heaven, some saints. But they do believe there could be a quick cleansing, like Padre Pio believed that he was going to have a quick cleansing and then he would go to heaven. But then you get to the purgatory where people are purged of their sins. Mother Mary told Sister Lucia that one of her friends who had died would be at that place, purgatory, till the end of the world. Others are in purgatory more temporarily. Really depends, I guess, on what you did and whether you went to confession and all that kind of stuff. And so that's something that goes on. And then there's hell. And if you go to hell, you're locked into hell, you're locked into your personality, you're locked into your sins for all of eternity. You'll have no light in you because you have no God with you. So there's no light shining from you. You're pure darkness, pure evil, pure cold. And if you're in hell with others, demons and humans who have actively chosen to reject Jesus' offer of salvation. They've actively chosen. Now, there have been some saints who said that Jesus offers people salvation right up at the moment of death. So he might come to you at the moment of death and offer salvation. And some have taken it, but some have rejected him. Some would feel that it would be hell to be in heaven with him. And so they have actively chosen that sort of an outcome. So they've chosen hell, which is like permanent fire. You're locked in your sins. So say if you were committing a lot of sexual immoralities, you're locked in that. The demons would probably be committing those horrible sexual immoralities on you. So hell is a really awful place. You don't want to go. Please pray for our brothers and sisters that no one ends up there. It's terrible. Locked in your personality would be hell. Yes, exactly. That's what the belief is. So when John was up on the cross and he told, when Jesus was up on the cross and he told his apostle John, behold your mother. And it said to his beloved disciple, one of the reasons that we mentioned her offspring in Revelation and also behold your mother, it's kind of his way, not referring to himself by his own name, John, sort of his way of telling the world that she is the mother. She's the mother of God. She's the crowned queen mother, according to Revelation. She's wearing a crown. And she is also our mother. So we can pray to her to act as an intercessor between us and Jesus. Now, it's like the queen mother going back to the time of King David. If you wanted to ask a favor of David, you could go directly to David and you can pray directly to the Father. You can pray directly to David's father if you wanted to. I mean, if you're going to go that same way or ask favors of David's father, I shouldn't say pray to David's father, but ask favors of them. You can go to David directly, or you could go through the queen mother, Bathsheba. And a lot of people chose to go through Bathsheba because that might be a way to get to bring your bring your requests to the king. Same thing. You could go to Mother Mary to bring your request to Jesus. Even in Revelation 5, you're going to see where the prayers of the saints are brought in and presented. And so saints' prayers are pretty powerful. So that's just something also to think about. So in summary, a lot of what's going on in the end times is an attack on families, an attack on children, an attack on the world, lots of impurities, lots of immodesty. Right now, we're probably worse off than they were in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so you can only imagine what is going on upstairs with God looking down at this world and seeing so much hatred, so much hurt, so much rejection. If what we can do right now is we can have hope. Though you can still have hope because we do know that in the end, Mary's Immaculate Heart is going to triumph. And also in the end, the book of Revelation, Jesus will triumph. There'll be a new heaven, a new earth, a new Jerusalem. So that's what I was going to say. So I appreciate you guys coming by. I appreciate Slam RN. Always good to see you. Good to see everybody else who's here. I hope you enjoy this little presentation. I also streamed it on Twitter. I noticed that my last presentation when I talked about Israel and Hamas was immediately demonetized from YouTube and barely anyone saw it. They didn't want to spread it around at all. So I think YouTube, unfortunately, is doing some pretty awful censoring. But hopefully people, but I noticed in contrast on X, my video, many people saw. So I pinned that tweet and a lot of people saw that one. I was pretty happy about that because I do feel very badly for people operating around the world right now. I feel very badly for a lot of the terrible, awful discrimination that we're seeing around the world. What happened in Russia just recently in an airport was morally egregious. And I hope that people can come to their senses around the world and realize that we're all in this together. We're all part of humanity. We should help others in the best ways we can. So thank you. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for God's glory.